Cher is the phoenix of pop music, the immortal queen of reinvention, and she has refused to be forgotten for almost 7 decades by the music industry. After being a youngster who was left behind in an orphanage with tattered shoes that were only held together by elastic bands, she eventually became the head of an empire that was worth more than $360 million. It is impossible to find another person in the profession who has endured as much as she has, the woman who defied time itself and turned poverty into platinum. She is the owner of a mansion in Malibu that is modeled after the Italian Renaissance and is placed dramatically above the Pacific Ocean. The mansion is worth tens of millions of dollars and features enormous bronze doors, cool marble floors, and windows that open up into seemingly limitless ocean views, where each and every sunset echoes the story of a life that refuses to ever give up. Many more estates worth multiple millions of dollars can be found dispersed around Beverly Hills. Each one is like a chapter that has been engraved into the book of her rebirth. Her garage is home to a magnificent collection of luxury automobiles, including Rolls-Royces that shine brightly under the lights, a Porsche 911 that roars like a heart that has never ceased burning, and a Cadillac Escalade that quietly carries moments of success and sadness throughout the years. On the other hand, this tale is not about wealth. It all comes down to the price of it. This is due to the fact that each dollar in that empire bears a scar. Each and every estate and automobile is a quiet testimony to the nights that she stood on stage with her legs shaking, to each and every note that she sang as her chest felt as like it was crumbling under the weight of illness. She were times where she dropped from fatigue backstage, and the gowns she wore glittered solely to hide bruises. Behind the sparkling pyrotechnics were nights like these. Behind the applause came extended periods of silence during which she struggled to catch her breath and struggled against her own body in order to avoid disappointing her audience. And at this moment, as her family stands before that enormous legacy, they do not see any assets. They see the lady who is the driving force behind everything, a mother who has wrapped all of her love in sacrifice, an artist who has poured blood and tears into every song, a flesh-and-blood human being who has set themselves down numerous times but has always chosen to rise again. You might want to consider leaving a tribute below if her music has ever helped you get through difficult times. In light of the fact that even a single like is a hushed expression of gratitude for the voice that helped us stand when we were unable to do it on our own. The earliest recollections that Cher has are not of lullabies or soft embraces. Rather, they are of the weight of poverty pushing against her ribs, the solitude of nights without solace, and the gnawing anxiety that she would never belong to anyone or anywhere. El Centro, C. She was born on May 20th, 1946, and she entered a world that was already broken at its very base. Her father, John Sarkeesian, was an Armenian-American truck driver with charisma but no roots, and he disappeared almost as quickly as he emerged. Her mother, Georgia Holt, sang with the heart of a dreamer, but she had to stand behind a donut counter in Fresno in order to survive. Cher was left with fragments instead of family, a surname that slipped away, a father who became a ghost, and a childhood that was tainted by instability as a result of their impetuous marriage, which ended before Cher could even form her first words. George's life turned into a desperate carousel of husbands, with a total of 7 of them, some of whom were repeated twice. Each of these men brought with him promises that eventually fell apart into dust. As a child, I was not an only child during those turbulent years. Her older half-sister, Jorgen, was born to the same mother as she was, but they did not share the same paternal relationship. And together, they were reluctant spectators to their mother's search for a permanent place to call home. However, permanence never materialized. Cher was only 2 years old when Georgia abandoned her in a time of anguish that no kid should ever have to go through. She was placed in the care of a Catholic orphanage. That was not harsh. Rather, it was a necessity. In spite of this, the image continues to be eerie. During the time that her mother was leaving, a young child with big eyes and a curious expression clutched at the hands of strangers. Her existence unfolded like a movie that was drenched in darkness. The small house that her grandparents lived in, rented quarters that smelt of dust, and shelters where she had nothing that belonged to her were all places that she moved around. During her childhood, she recalled spending evenings hunched under thin blankets, the winter air escaping through breaches in the walls, and the embarrassment of wearing clothes that were so worn that they garnered whispers within the classroom. If she wanted to make it through another day, she once wrapped rubber bands across the bottoms of her shoes, which had become completely worn out. The jolt of her life was so severe that it was almost cruel. After spending a week subsisting on canned beans, she made a brief visit to Beverly Hills, where her mother was pursuing opportunities with yet another spouse. These differences did not impress anyone. Her identity was etched with the wounds of bewilderment that they caused. Not only was she impoverished, but she was also unnoticed. As a result of her struggles with dyslexia and an undiagnosed learning disability, she was perceived as being unmotivated in the classroom. Her teachers misunderstood her lack of behavior for rebellion. Assaults were made regarding the report cards. While other girls were making plans for dances and fantasizing about outfits, she was already wondering about rhinestones and spotlights already. She fantasized that when she was on stage, she would no longer be the child that was not desired, but rather someone that the world could not ignore. By the time she was 16, her desire to flee burned more intensely than her humiliation. She quit school, packed a little bag with nothing but clothing and dreams that were never going to come true, and boarded a bus to travel to Los Angeles. Despite the fact that the city in the early 1960s was rife with broken promises, it did provide her with a potentially life-saving opportunity. This is Sonny Bono. He had not yet become her lover, but he was a man who provided her with a couch to sleep on when she had nowhere else to go. What started off as a matter of convenience eventually evolved into survival, and ultimately collaboration. At long last, a force that defied the odds was revealed. The year 1965 marked the year when their voices were finally heard by the world when they released the song, I Got You. There was more to the song than just launching a career. Cher was rescued from the abyss of invisibility, the dark pit of being forgotten through the power of this. Yet celebrity is a fickle thing. As their early successes began to wane, their films failed, and the limelight began to recede. In order to stay alive, they shifted their focus to the smoky stages of Las Vegas, where sequins sparkled beneath inexpensive neon. Singing night after night, not for the sake of gaining fame, but rather for the purpose of surviving. It was her voice that carried the pain of a child who had been abandoned in an orphanage, the anxiety of shoes coming apart, and the unquenchable need for a permanent home. And although no one in the crowd was aware of it, each and every note was a part of the foundation that she would eventually construct for her kingdom. It was not an empire that was built out of privilege. Rather, it was one that was forged out of wounds, abandonment, and a desire that was so profound that the only way to satisfy it was to create a life that no one could take away from them. Cher, who was only a few years shy of her 20th birthday at the time, and Sonny were confronted with a harsh reality when their celebrity began to wane in the late 1960s and the charts stopped singing their names. Not only were they running out of time, but they were also running out of money and momentum. Something that had previously seemed like destiny was now trembling on the brink of deterioration. They rebuilt themselves as a nightclub act in Las Vegas, which was not a decision born out of glamour, but rather it was a move born out of absolute survival. It was hardly a mind-blowingly innovative idea. It was a precarious survival line. They reconstructed themselves out of fragments, while the stage lights were hazy, the sour smell of cocktails that had been spilled could be smelled, and the heavy air of diminishing relevance was crushing down on them. Instead of being chart toppers, they are now entertainers. Their currency consisted of quick banter, snappy comedy, and undeniable chemistry between the two of them. Cher was the focal point of the group. It was her acerbic humor that broke through the haze, and her stage presence was so electrifying that no spotlight could lessen its intensity. Ironically, Rebirth emerged from the desperation that one experienced. In 1971, the Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour made its debut on television, and it quickly became a fixture in the homes of millions of people. Audiences were treated to a dazzling rebirth of entertainment. For Cher, who was only 25 years old at the time, it was evidence that survival might sometimes be disguised as victory. Despite the fact that they were laughing, their world was falling apart. However, it was not love that kept their marriage together. Rather, it was the legacy that they had left behind.